Surprise anybody, right? Like you've probably figured out that I'm long-winded. We're on slide 26 of 42 after 2 days. So we're not going to get through everything that I wanted to get through. I'm going to modify your test slightly, and we're going to end this basically with the end of the revolution. Right? My original goal was to try to get through sort of the Articles of Confederation in our first attempt to govern, and then next week we were going to go directly into the Constitution. Instead, I'm going to take sort of foundations of all government to include the Articles of Confederation, and I'm just going to roll that into the next unit. We good?
Yes, sir.
All right. So let's actually talk about your test then real quick first. Tomorrow you have an exam. That exam is going to essentially cover just the Revolutionary War now, right? So the lead up to the Revolutionary War and then the war itself. So you need to, yes, ma'am.
So nothing before that, like.
No, I don't spiral old stuff.
Oh, really?
No.
It's just over this.
It's just over what we've covered in these 3 PowerPoints. Now, obviously we've already covered the French and Indian War, and then we obviously covered the French and Indian War briefly here again because we were dealing with the lead up. But no, basically we're going to deal with like the colonies and then the revolution, right? So like everything, this test is going to essentially just be over any behaviors prior to us becoming the actual United States. Are we good? Okay. Focused on white people. And so when we get to the French and Indian War now, like if you get a question on the French and Indian War on the test, it's going to be like white-centric. And like at that point, we're not going over battles. We're not going over, Braddock's expedition or things like that. That was already covered, right? What you would end up getting tested on as far as the French and Indian War goes is going to be like the Townshend Acts, the Declaratory Act, anything that sort of pissed off the colonists to the point that they were ready to revolt and have a revolution. All right? So for tomorrow, what you need to predominantly know are the separation or the differences in the colonies, right? How is Massachusetts different than Virginia, different than the middle colonies? Yes? Right? So how were they created? What was the purpose of their creation? What were they doing? Okay? And then the revolution, right? Causes of the revolution and the revolution itself. All right? And it'll be about 50-50. So about half your test is going to be on colonial America, and half your test is going to be on causes and conflict within the revolution. All right? Lovely. Let's move on in life. Okay, so the British are successful initially, right? The British are winning the war initially. They take New York, right? Washington barely escapes, and the British essentially have a very specific plan of attack. It's going to try to like divide colonial forces in order to make it, essentially, in order to make it one like really large war in which Britain is fighting against 13 colonies that have come together and formed one nation, they're going to try to split them, right? That's sort of the idea here, right? So we're going to take New York, and then we're going to go up the Hudson River, right? And so the Hudson River basically goes north. It's a south-flowing river, right? Like it comes out there. But we're going to go up the river north. And so that, if the British can do that, if they can take New York, right, and then go up the Hudson River, they've now cut off Massachusetts. Do you understand that? Okay, so that's sort of one of the ideas here. And ultimately, they're not going to be very successful, okay? Which should stand to reason because we're American and we're not British today. Okay? But early on, we're fighting a losing battle. Okay? Again, you need Thomas Paine to come in and write in order to try to create some sort of fervor or theological belief in the necessity of the cause, right? We don't have a very big army. We don't have a lot of volunteers. I think we talked about this yesterday, right? What percentage of the people are actually involved in the war? Right? You're looking at 20-25% that are actively supporting the patriot position. Okay? And that would include like women who are obviously not in combat roles. Okay? So understand that even in that 25%, that doesn't mean that like 700,000 people or 600,000 people or whatever it was that would have been in the United States at the time, or would have been in the colonies at the time. That doesn't mean that all 600,000 of them are like putting on a uniform, donning a uniform, grabbing a rifle, and going out and fighting, right? Many of them are trying to support the war effort in other ways. Okay? So this American Crisis is again, another Paine publication, right? So Paine was the one that wrote Common Sense. Okay? He is going to utilize literature, utilize the means of the day in order to essentially propagandize, right? Like he's trying to rally support. At this point, like this is one of those things that happens in American history early on, right? Speeches and essays are widely distributed, they're widely discussed, and they're significant for sort of the ideology that is apparent in the United States, right? So, Washington, because things are so bad, Washington is going to do something that I told you yesterday we don't do, right? When do we not fight? Winter. Yet, Washington is going to take a big risk, right? And so, this is like a rendition of Washington crossing the Delaware River in Christmas of 1776, okay? And it's a... Okay, so here's the thing, right? Washington is going to put all of his men into these boats, okay? By the way, do y'all notice in the picture, what's in the water? That's how cold it is, right? Okay, that's how cold it is. You have major rivers that are almost freezing over, okay? Which obviously then also makes it more difficult to traverse the river. But that's also part of the reason why the Hessians, right, who are a professional fighting force, right, like they're paid to fight, they're not really paying attention, right? They don't really have sentries posted, right? A sentry, that's a military term for somebody who's on watch, somebody who is staying awake at night and making sure that you're not attacked at night, or making sure that your encampment is not overrun, okay? Because it's a holiday, right? The military actually celebrates holidays, okay? So the fact that it's a holiday means that they're even less worried about being attacked, right? Like they're less attentive to the possibility of an attack. And so Washington is able to cross with a significant number of men, and he defeats the Hessians, right? And then there's a second battle of Trenton in January, and now he defeats British soldiers near Princeton, New Jersey. And so Washington is beginning to turn the tide, right? And it is a desperate gamble. Washington is overextending himself. Washington is sort of breaking some of the basic rules that we have of warfare at the time. And not rules in the sense of like honorability, right, or like gentlemanliness in warfare, but rather rules in the sense of like that's just not a smart thing to do. Okay? By the time we get to 1777, right, we have General John Burgoyne, who has moved his troops from New York up along the Hudson, right, and we have the Battle of Saratoga, which is probably the biggest turning point of the war, right? The Battle of Saratoga is a significant defeat for the British, right? Burgoyne is going to lose a whole bunch of military supplies, right? But the very fact that this massive British army is able to be defeated by essentially a bunch of farmers with pitchforks, right? I mean, that's kind of what they are. All of a sudden, the U.S., right, or the colonists, or whatever you want to call them at this point, are looking like a real country. They're looking like they have an actual chance of succeeding, right? Which is going to be significant because once you can win some big battles, and Saratoga is one of them, guess what's going to happen? People are going to aid you. You are going to have allies. You have access to it on D2L. You don't need to write down every single word that's on the PowerPoint, guys. Okay? You have access to it on D2L. What you need to realize, Saratoga is a turning point, and interestingly enough, that's not on the slide, but you ought to write that down. Right? That needed to be written down, not on the slide. Turning point. Right? Why is it a turning point? Largely because we can now align with France. Not that we weren't aligned with France, right? I told you France is kind of aiding us a little bit, right? But y'all realize, y'all pay attention to what's going on in the world right now? You know that Russia and Ukraine are at war, yes? What is the United States doing?
Aiding Ukraine.
How?
Giving supplies.
We're just giving them supplies, right? We're just giving them supplies. There's a significant difference between, like, supplying an ally and actually going to combat with an ally, right? There's a significant difference. And what really is going to happen, right, is what do the Americans or what do the colonists need most in order to defeat the British? No? Okay, so here's the thing, right? The Battle of Saratoga, the Battle of Trenton. Our fighting men, right, the colonial fighting men are capable of going toe-to-toe with the British forces, right? We've actually had some success and we've had some victories, right? So when you talk army to army, we're okay. What do we not have? People. A navy. The British have the strongest navy in the world, okay? The French, because they're a more established country, they are an imperial nation, right? Like they have colonies around the globe, okay? They have a real navy, right? Meaning that they have like man-of-war ships that would aid the U.S. because right now the British are basically controlling the seaboard, okay? If the French come and then they engage in naval combat with those British ships, that turns some of the attention away from the battles that are occurring on land, and instead forces the British to now contend with a French navy, right? So these two sides are now going to agree, like, we are both going to fight. They are going to actually fight, okay? And there is an agreement, and this is important for you to understand, right? There is an agreement that the French will not sue for peace without American consent, okay? Now, I need you to understand this because this is important, right? America is not really a nation yet, right? They're just a whole bunch of people that are engaged in what really could be construed as a civil war, right? They are not an independent nation. They do not have nation status around the globe, okay? Which means that the French should still be looking out for the French. That makes sense? You understand that's what countries do. They look out for themselves. That should be the goal of a country. You should be concerned about your own welfare and well-being first. So what that means is the French now engage into this. The French and the British are equals. They are both superpowers. They are equal. The colonists are way down here. Okay? If it was beneficial for the French to essentially throw the colonists under the bus, right, because they could get stuff out of England in order to not aid the colonists and end the war, the French should want to do that. But this agreement, this alliance, says the French will not. Both countries are going to continue fighting until American independence is achieved. the way, why, do y'all understand another reason why France is willing to do this? They hate the British, but specifically, what are they trying to do? Not yet. That doesn't happen for another like 15, 20 years. Okay? They've just lost the French and Indian War, which I told you was really a global conflict, right? It's World War I.
They're trying to get their get back.
A little revenge is going to be a part of that. You understand? Right? There's going to be a little revenge factor in all this as well. Okay? Valley Forge becomes significant. So by 1778, again, Washington is going to do something that actually becomes pretty significant, right? So, couple of things. One, Washington is going to make sure that his troops stay for the winter. They're going to winter in Valley Forge, which is in Pennsylvania. Okay? During this winter, Washington's going to do a couple of things. He gets a dude named Baron von Steuben. Baron is like a title. Von Steuben is the name. Right? That dude is a Prussian military officer. Pretty sure he's Prussian. Okay? And I'm not, what? Not Russian.
German, but...
Yes, more German. So, Germany, fun fact, do y'all know when Germany becomes a country? In the 19th century. The United States is older than Germany as a nation. Right? Okay? Instead, what you had over here were like Germanic states, right? Like Prussia being one of them. Right? That's the Hessians are essentially Germans today. Germany's weird like that. And but he's going to come and help train the troops. We're going to spend this winter making them more professional. Another significant thing that Washington does, and you need to understand this because one, it's a risk, right? Anybody know what the biggest killer is in war?
Disease.
Disease. Always disease. Always disease. Disease will kill more people than combat ever will. Right? Well, but then, is radiation poisoning disease, or is that like...
Well, the explosion happens.
Y'all right, ladies?
I mean, the explosion itself is fairly large, but only two nuclear weapons have ever been deployed in like the history of the world. It's not going to happen. Nobody's going to do it. Nobody, no, because even now like Russia's talking about tactical nukes, right? Which are like very small nuclear weapons aimed at very specific targets in order to try to limit the damage. And fun fact about war, you don't want to annihilate the countryside of whatever country you are defeating. Look, this is how you know I'm a terrible human being. I'm going to be honest with you. If I ever ran a country and I went to war with somebody, like, no, I'm using biological warfare. Right? Like, I'm just going to infect the population of my enemy with some disease and kill them all that way. Okay? That way I can walk in with an antidote, right? Give it to myself and to my people. And then I just roll the bodies up, throw them in a mass grave. And now I've got hospitals and schools and roads and everything built. I ain't got to build nothing. I ain't got to rebuild nothing because I didn't bomb nothing. This is why you don't ever want to vote for me to be president of the United States. I'm just saying. I'm scary. One of the things Washington is going to do, though, is Washington is going to inoculate his troops against smallpox. You know what inoculate means? It means vaccinate. That's an excellent question. Aaron, do you know how you vaccinate?
Shot.
What's,
They got guns.
like, from a gun? I'm just going to shoot you with a gun and you've got a vaccine now? Like,
Like
a syringe.
yeah.
What's in it? Air?
No.
Water?
The
Blood from other
disease.
That virus.
The actual virus.
So
No. So here's the thing. What they do is they give you a very, very, very small amount of the virus in order to try to trigger a natural immune reaction, right, where your white blood cells will attack that virus. Once your white blood cells attack that virus, your white blood cells are smart. They basically encode themselves and they're like, hey, here's the game plan if we ever see this disease again. And then if the disease is ever reintroduced, the white blood cells basically like mutate into the game plan to kill that disease, and they kill it. Okay? That's essentially what inoculation is. So what Washington does at Valley Forge is he basically like gives all of his people smallpox. Right? Like, because they don't have syringes, they ain't got needles back then, right? He goes through and he puts like little tiny cuts on people's arms. And then he takes a little bit of like the pus from somebody that's got smallpox and like wipes it in the cut. I know, now y'all are like, oh, didn't have my breakfast yet. Alright, by 1779, the colonials, we're going to call them the colonials. The colonials are successful enough. By the way, do we know that the Spanish, dude, the poor Spanish, man, they're always so late to the game when it comes to North America. Okay? When we go back to the French and Indian War, did y'all notice that the outcome of the French and Indian War, England got Florida?
No.
No? It's in one of the PowerPoints somewhere. Okay? Because Spain is late, and Spain actually sides with the French. What? French and Indian. Spain comes in late on the side of the French. Right? And it cost them Florida. Now Spain's going to come in late on the side of the Americans in an attempt to regain some territory. Right? But again, the very fact that the Spanish are willing to come and aid the colonials shows a couple of things. One, it shows the successes that the colonials have had. They are a legitimate fighting force. Okay? That's going to allow them at the end of this war to also then begin to create some alliances and some relationships with foreign nations in order to try to build as a country. Shh, stop talking. Don't yeah when you're the one talking to. Don't you try to back the bus up over her. You running your mouth just as much. This brings us to Yorktown, right? So Yorktown, you need to understand. Yorktown is in Virginia, 1781. This is it. Yorktown is the final battle, right? So when we talk about turning points, or we talk about the war, beginning is, you gotta notice, Lexington and Concord,
Lexington and Concord.
right? And then Bunker Hill, okay? The turning point is Saratoga and to a lesser extent Trenton. Right?
Yeah.
Trenton is Washington crossing the Delaware. The final campaign, the final battle is Yorktown. Okay? And so Yorktown is where Lord Cornwallis is going to surrender. Yes, ma'am.
What's Valley Forge? Is that part of the turning point? Or
No, it's not a turning point. Excuse me. Valley Forge is important. Valley Forge is important for you to understand in order to recognize the significance of sort of disease as it pertains to combat troops and the necessity of that inoculation. And then secondly, the idea of turning what was still essentially, for lack of a better term, farmers with guns into an actual army. We talked about that a little bit yesterday, right? About the fact that we have militiamen who don't know how to drill. They don't know what military movements are, right? Like if you told them, hey, I need a flanking movement over here, they're like, I don't know what that means. Okay? So the Prussian officer Steuben, right, and the inoculation against smallpox are significant for the general war effort, right? To sort of turn the colonists into a legitimate force. And Yorktown, what happens, I told you a minute ago, right, that the French Navy is really what we need, yes? Okay, so the French Navy is going to come in. Yorktown is in Virginia, right, so it's along the Chesapeake, right here, like it's in that Chesapeake Bay, okay? Yorktown, so the British have the coastal area, right, like the British Navy is controlling the Atlantic Ocean. The French are going to come in behind them and create a blockade, right? And a blockade is one of those military terms that you ought to understand, okay? So blockades are essentially naval sieges. Anybody know what a siege is?
Destroy
No. You surround a fort and you wait them out. Nope, not guerrilla warfare. Literally no warfare. A siege is no warfare. You surround a fort and you wait for what? For them to run out of food and ammunition. Because if you have surrounded them, you have cut off supply lines. I cannot stress this enough. Supply lines are essential to armies. Essential. If you cannot get resupplied with food and bullets, can't do anything. If you cannot get resupplied with food and bullets, you are starving to death and you are incapable of engaging the enemy in combat. Okay? So the French are going to blockade the British there. Okay? That's just a siege with naval ships. Right? So you're going to surround some area and prevent resupply from occurring. So this brings us to the Treaty of Paris. This is the end of the war. Right? So this is a formal agreement between England and the colonists now. Right? So the U.S. sends Ben Franklin, John Jay, and John Adams to go to negotiate peace. Okay? England will recognize the independence of the 13 colonies, and they provide the colonies with all territory east of the Mississippi River. Okay, so that is significant territorial gain.
Can you say that one more time? All territory east?
East of the Mississippi River.
After the proclamation.
No, so the proclamation line is the Appalachian Mountain Ridge. Okay? So just so you know geography, right? And y'all don't even take geography no more. The Appalachian Mountains run right through here. And basically northern Georgia, right, through the North Carolina, Tennessee border, western Virginia, eastern Kentucky, all of West Virginia, right, western Pennsylvania, and up into western New York. Okay, that is the Appalachian Mountain Range. To the west of the Appalachian Mountain Range, over here is what we call the Ohio River Valley. Okay, so there's Ohio, there's Indiana, there's Illinois, there's Kentucky. That very jagged border, right, actually from really West Virginia to Ohio, right, Kentucky to Indiana and Illinois, that is the Ohio River. Okay, the land west of the Appalachian Mountains is actually very rich, fertile farmland. It's excellent land to own. And that is what, after the French and Indian War, was left for the Native Americans. It has now been ceded to the new United States. Okay, to the 13 colonies. Now, hopefully, without me even telling you, hopefully you can already sort of put the pieces together and realize that's going to cause some problems with who? With the natives. Right? Because the British promised the natives all this land, and now the British have lost the war to the colonials, and they are promised, and the colonials now control all this land. The Indians didn't lose, but they lost land anyways. Alright? Okay? So, by 83, we're going to get a formal agreement, right? Now, what happens then is you had, and I think we talked about this when we talked about how many people were fighting, right? How many people were loyalists?
25.
Right? There's basically 20-25% that were Tories, right? Loyal to the British Crown, right? The loyalists that can are getting out. They're running away. Okay? They are going back to the British Empire, or they are running to Canada, or to the Caribbean if they can get to Barbados, I think is still controlled by the French. Barbados was French, wasn't it? I don't know. Whatever islands the English are still controlling and agree. If they can get to another English-held territory, they're doing it. Okay? Because obviously if you were a Tory, if you supported the British and the colonists have now won, the Patriots have won, right, you do not get to participate in the spoils of war, which means you do not prosper economically as a result of the war. In fact, many of them had their property taken, right? Many of them literally just confiscated, okay? Which is one of the reasons why they run away. If they had not run away, then they are living in the new country, destitute, homeless, right? Without any wealth, without any opportunity. Okay? If they run back to England, they might have some level of opportunity, especially if they'd actually served, right? They can get some sort of veterans benefits. Okay, they're actually homes. You remember Roger Roberts? Robert Rogers? God, I'm dyslexic. Robert Rogers, you remember him? The Ranging Way of War guy, the guy that created the Army Rangers? Yes? Right? He is a loyalist. He ends up living out his life in an English common home for veterans. Right? Because he ends up just poor and destitute. One, the dude had a drinking problem. Two, I need you to understand, like, he is a hero of the French and Indian War, yes? The British owed him a lot of money because of his actions in the French and Indian War. When the revolution happens, Rogers sides with the British in the hopes that he'll get that money that's owed to him. Because obviously, if the British government owes you like $10,000, and then you rebel, and you revolt against the British government, they're not going to pay you the money they owe you. Alright? And so, at that point, we're going to end up with a political revolution. How much time we got? I don't know, let's get out of here. 50? What time y'all normally get out of here? 10:10? So it should be 50. We're cutting 10 minutes off. So 10 off the first, 10 off the second. So it should be 9:50. So I've got 7 minutes. I think I can get through at least the Articles of Confederation then. Alright, so let me see if I can't do that. We'll get right back where I wanted to be in the first place. So, I told you, or maybe I didn't, maybe I told my government class. I can't remember. You cannot have the United States without the Enlightenment. Do we understand that? Okay? There is an intellectual revolution that is going on at the same time as a political and military revolution in the United States. Right? We create this sort of republicanism ideology, and I need you to understand that's Republican with a lowercase r. Okay? Do y'all understand the difference? Okay, I'm not talking about like the Republican Party now and what they believe. I'm talking about republicanism in the sense that we are going to create a republic. That is a form of government in which we are going to send people to government in order to act on our behalf. And we are going to create documents that define the rule of law, right? Every single state has their own state constitution. Okay? Even today, every state has a state constitution. Right? So next year when you get to my dual government class and I ask you, how many constitutions are there in the United States? You know the correct answer already, right? 51.
51.
There's 50 states plus one U.S. Constitution. So there's 51 constitutions. Yes? Now, initially though, and realize this, initially, when we, actually even before we have obtained our actual freedom, right, before we've actually negotiated the peace agreement with the Treaty of Paris, right, we are going to create the Articles of Confederation. You all know what a confederation is, like lowercase c confederation. Alliance is actually a really good word for it. Okay? It is a loose grouping of autonomous entities. I'm using big words. What does autonomous mean? Self-controlling. Right? Just so you understand, the best example that I can give you of a confederation today is the United Nations. It is a confederation. Okay? There are 180-ish members of the United Nations. Okay? They all send a delegate to New York City, and theoretically they cooperate and work together. Except that Russia and the Ukraine are both members of the UN. And here's the problem. Okay? When Russia invades Ukraine, what does the UN do?
They're in a predicament.
Well, here's the thing. Let's take a non-UN country, right? I'm pretty sure Iraq is a non-UN nation. I think. I don't know. Let's just pretend, for the sake of argument, that Iraq is a non-UN nation, right? And the United States invades Iraq. What does the UN do? Yeah, again. What does the UN do?
Nothing.
They help America.
Aren't we a part of the
Okay, so if Saudi Arabia is a part of the UN, and Saudi Arabia is also a Muslim nation, a theocracy essentially, right? I mean, it's a monarchy, it's the kingdom of Saudi Arabia, but they are aligned with Iraq in many ways, right? What if they don't like the fact that the U.S. is invaded? They're a member of the UN.
That's why it's a confederation.
Confederations have no real power or authority, right? When China engages in child labor, right? Inhumane practices. Okay? In fact, China has, I don't know if they still are, and I'm not going to try to pronounce the region of China where it's happening, right? But in Western China, right? The Chinese are just committing genocide against Muslims. You all know that? If you don't, you ought to pay attention to what goes on in the world a little bit more, right? Genocide is never a good thing. What is the UN doing? Oh no, the UN does something. Please stop. That's very mean. We don't like that one bit. So please stop. There's no enforcement authority. Okay? I need you to understand that. We are going to create a confederation in which you have 13 independent nations. By the way, you know state is a synonym for nation, yes? They mean the same thing in many instances, right? This is why Canada does not have states. They have provinces. There's a slight difference. Okay? But we're going to have 13 essentially independent states that are going to create a confederation that is supposed to oversee essentially foreign policy issues and war. Okay? But it is ultimately a massive failure. Right? So, we're going to stop there. Honestly, I probably still won't put the Articles of Confederation on the test. I'll probably pull those questions off and replace them for you. All right, any questions?